Holy shnikes, I'm here with pretty much the highest end Z690 build that you can do. The ASRock Z690 Aqua, and this DDR5 memory. DDR5 speeds are heating up. Got the bugs worked out of the manufacturing process. This is DDR5 5600, and it was manufactured less than a week ago. Crazy, I know. We got a lot to talk about. Alright, so first up, huge thanks to ASRock. The ASRock Aqua, they're extremely high-end, very limited edition motherboards with a built-in all-in-one custom loop monoblock. So this is a motherboard for somebody who is either experienced with a custom loop build or is not afraid to get their hands wet. This motherboard is huge, it's heavy, and there's a lot to unpack. Oh, and this is also the Antec torque. Now, you might be noticing that it's silver and gray. Well, that's gonna go with the aesthetic here. I did that myself, so it's not very good. Meet the Aqua. Get a welcome packet. And it has level 1 techs. Thank you for the purchase of the Z690 Aqua motherboard. It's a flagship, comes with a monoblock. PC modding supreme user, we hope you enjoy it. ASRock commits to providing high quality motherboards with excellent performance. And you get a cool little card, like a little credit card. There's the motherboard. Now, I might have already had it out of the box. It was really hard to keep all the stuff nice and clean, but I saved the peels, because I knew you'd find it appealing. I want you to look at that. They personalized the motherboard. This isn't the first time ASRock's been so generous, but much appreciated. Yeah, so remember how I was saying ultra high-end, ultra premium Z690 motherboard? This is limited edition of 500, I think. Maybe 1,000, something like that. Limited edition. Alright, to remove the monoblock, we gotta take these 4 screws out and then our VRM screws. So that's pretty standard in terms of motherboard monoblocks. Before I do that, let's take a look at our motherboard layout, because the layout is interesting. So this motherboard has 3 physical X16 slots, 2 of which are PCI Express 5.0, it's by 16 or by 8 by 8, depending on what your configuration is. This is a PCI Express 3.0 by 1, which goes through the chipset. This is PCI Express 4.0 by 4 electrical, which goes through the chipset. There are a total of 3 M.2 on this motherboard, 2 through the chipset, 1 directly into our Alder Lake Z690 LGA 1700 CPU. Now, that's a lot of connectivity, that's a lot of bandwidth for your M.2, and that configuration will not bottleneck, because the connection from the chipset to the CPU is the brand new, PCI Express 4.0 equivalent, 8-lane equivalent. So even if you're running the highest end M.2s, it's going to go through the chipset and it's not going to bottleneck. This motherboard also features onboard Thunderbolt, and it has 2 full-size DisplayPort in connections. So if you're rocking an add-in GPU, like I plan to add an RX 6900 XT, you can take 2 DisplayPort out cables from your GPU, take it back into the motherboard, and then have video over a Thunderbolt connection. So if you want to run a Thunderbolt monitor, you can go out and in and back out again. That's totally fine. If you're rocking one of the new level 1 techs USB-C KVMs, you can totally do that, because it's going to be DisplayPort out to motherboard in to USB-C plus DisplayPort out again to the KVM, and then the other side can be your laptop or whatever. So that's pretty fun. The other nifty thing about this motherboard that I alluded to, DDR5 6400 tested and qualified from the factory. So yes, I'm looking forward to being able to test that on this motherboard. In addition to other connectivity that we've got sprinkled around the motherboard, well, we have 2 8-pin power connections, our standard ATX 24-pin power connection. We've got USB 50/50 and digital RGB headers at the top and bottom edges of the motherboard. In terms of 4-pin fan headers, there's a total of 8, and they always come in groups of 2. 2, 4, 6, 8. This motherboard has 8 6 gigabit per second SATA ports, so if you wanted to run some sort of crazy water-cooled home server setup with Alder Lake, you probably could do that. Although, really, I don't know. You get 2 30-pin USB 5 gigabit headers, 2 Type-C headers, that's 20 gigabit. And these Type-C headers can power 2x2 connections, so you'll want to make sure that your USB-C header on your case can actually power 20 gigabits. Also located to the bottom edge of the motherboard, we have power reset, a nice digital status LED readout, and then of course 2 USB 2.0 headers, so you can have all of your extra accessories. Also on board this motherboard, an OLED status readout. That's in the middle of the board. So you get both the LED postcode as well as an OLED screen. In terms of rear I/O, there's a lot to be excited about. As I mentioned, you have the 2 DisplayPort in connections, and that goes to your 2 Thunderbolt out connections. This is Thunderbolt 4, the full qualification Alder Lake Z690 platform. We have a 10 gigabit Ethernet provided by an Aquantia NIC, and then we have a 2.5 gig NIC, so dual NICs, 2.5 gig and 10 gig. We've also got an extra 10 gigabit USB 3.2 port, plus also 5 gigabit USB ports. This is our audio solution. This is 7.1 analog codec with SPDIF out, and then we've got HDMI out from the iGPU if you find yourself needing to use the iGPU. This is the Wi-Fi 6E solution on board. That is an Intel solution, so it's a dual antenna NIC coming right out of the back of the motherboard. Then of course we have a BIOS flashback button and a clear CMOS button, because hey, if you got this motherboard, you're probably overclocking, right? And if you're overclocking, you're probably going to be clearing your CMOS a lot. The audio solution is based around a Realtek ALC1220 audio codec. It is 7.1 premium Blu-ray support. It has WiMA audio capacitors for the front outputs and an ESS Sabre 9218 DAC. That's 130 dB signal to noise ratio. Now, as this is a high-end premium experience, there's more in the box. First up, our water cooling kit. I like the icon for this one. It says no water. So check it out. This is a digital pressure gauge. Now when you first get this, you might be thinking, oh no, the battery's dead. No, you just unscrew the back. There's an O-ring there, and then you just gotta pull the little tiny piece of plastic out, then you're good to go. And this part of the box is, you guessed it, your required thermal pads and instructions on where the thermal pads go. And they're numbered. This is great. I love this because this makes it a lot harder to screw up, because there's different pads of different thicknesses. There's also a couple extra screws in there in case you do really horrible things to your screws. And also thermal paste for the actual CPU connection. This is your software and accessory bundle, which includes the manual, software setup guide, as well as your quick installation guide, which is of course multilingual. Now there is a really interesting note in the manual, the whole 1 DIMM per channel, 2 DIMMs per channel. Can you push the full DDR5 bandwidth with 2 DIMMs per channel? Well, the manual notes, officially supported DDR5 4400, 1 DIMM per channel, 3600, 2 DIMMs per channel. So that sort of echoes my own personal experiences trying to run 4 DIMMs per channel on a given motherboard. But hey, 32 gigabytes and 2 sticks of memory running at 5600 with an overclock, I can live with that. One other thing that I really love about the manual is that it tells you which USB ports are from what controller. So at the rear, USB 3_2, 3_3, and 3_4 are from an ASMedia ASM 1074, and USB 3_1 is from an ASMedia 3042. This motherboard also supports USB power delivery on USB 3_3 and USB 3_4. Nice. And finally, in the motherboard box, we've got our extra M.2 screws and our detachable, movable 3M stick-on Wi-Fi 6E antenna. This is great. You can move it. It's got a plenty long enough cord. Love it. This is how all Wi-Fi should be. Not the little short antennas. No, this is what you want. Well, take that back. What you want is to be wired in, especially when you've got a 10 gigabit NIC. Sometimes it's not always possible. I actually use the wireless on my motherboard for when the internet's down, and it's like, oh, I have to get on the internet. I'll just tether off of a phone, and that works pretty well through the Wi-Fi, so it's nice to have it. Now for this monoblock design, there are 1, 2, 3 areas that you need thermal pads. So this one's already got thermal pads down here. They didn't stick, but it's okay. It's okay. The surprising thing about this monoblock is that it also doesn't include the M.2. I would have figured that ASRock would include the M.2, but there is a substantial heatsink underneath the OLED screen here. And then of course down here we have our 2 mirror finish heatsinks. Why wouldn't ASRock use this as a monoblock for the M.2? Well, it turns out the M.2 is here in the front. This is actually pretty genius because you're gonna get a lot more airflow in the front. Now there's a lot to like about this heatsink. One, look, the screws are captured. You can't lose the screws. Are you gonna lose this giant piece of metal? No, you'll never lose the screws. Same with the mirror finish, you'll never lose the screws. This is a big honking piece of metal. This is a big honking piece of metal. This is gonna get way better airflow than anything that's down here because your graphics card is gonna cover this unless you go, custom loop for your graphics card, which I highly recommend if you're gonna do a build like this. I mean, why not? In for a penny, in for a pound. So your PCI Express 4.0 M.2 through the CPU, bam, located right in the front. Another reason that might be nice if you're doing LN2 overclocking and you want to use NVMe for some reason, although I figure most people probably use SATA for that, but it's far away from the CPU socket, so there we go. We're ready to install our CPU and get this thing benchmarking. Here we are and ready for first power on. I've colored outside the lines in so many ways. First off, I'm using a giant radiator in the top. This is the Antec Torque, and it's silver and gray. I did that color scheme, but I've put everything in the top. I've given this tube a little extra length because I plan to cut the tube here and feed a GPU on a block, but I'm going to use quick release fittings. I got some quick release fittings around here somewhere, but I can't find them. But this is a quick release fitting, so you put this together like that, and then everything is connected. So I can put one in the tube here and make it easy to add and remove the GPU from the loop. This would work great for that. As you can see, I've got my ASRock Aqua mounted in here, Z690 with my Alder Lake 12900K and my OLED screen, and I'm really happy with how this build turned out. Now I've got to mount some fans in the front, I got to do some cable management. We'll worry about all that later. Right now, let's get this to the bench and see how it performs. Now for the GPU, I'm rocking an ASRock Formula OC 6900 XT from AMD. But don't worry, I've also got a 3090 I can throw in there. We can figure some stuff out. Now this 6900 XT, I don't have a water block for it. So it's air cooling. But again, until I dive into this, cut the cable, and good to go, should be good. Also worth mentioning, I've got my loop filled with distilled water. I did a couple flushes with distilled water. I need to add a biocide agent in this. I usually like to use Mayhem's formula for this. That works really well. And I like to go a little bit on the strong side because stuff tends to grow in my loops because of the lack of maintenance. I don't usually put colorant or dyes or anything else like that in the loop because this thing is going to run for 5 years with no maintenance probably. And yeah, I don't care about any of that. As you can hear, it's pretty quiet. Now I do have to do a little bit of work here to work the bubbles out of my loop. It'll be even quieter once I get those bubbles out. ASRock has certainly put together a premium experience. This is one of the top performing Alder Lake systems out of the box. Of course, excluding liquid nitrogen and extreme overclocks when you're looking at benchmarks like the 3D Mark benchmarks and everything else. So yeah, top performer, just putting it together, and it's not insanely loud. And I will say again, it is complete overkill having a radiator this big just for the CPU, but I sized this so I could run the GPU and the CPU off of a radiator, and the more radiator you have, the slower the fans can move, the quieter it is. It's nice. Oh, another thing I need to do to finish out this build, the gold power supply. Need some aluminum foil to fix that right up. Alright, this has been a fun adventure. Thanks again to ASRock for sending this over, and happy 20th anniversary. 20th anniversary to ASRock, yeah, who knew? I'm Wendell, this is Level 1, I'm signing out, and you can find me in the Level 1 forums.